Racing. It's so good to do it again. I raced for the first time in, I guess it must be about 6 months on the weekend. And it was so much fun. It was just awesome to be in that environment again and just to see how I'm doing. And actually, I had a really good race and probably one of my best. So I was pretty pleased with that. I wanted to just run through it and my nutrition choices before, during and after the race, just to give you a bit of insight into how I think about it all and approach it, so hopefully it might be useful to you. This video is going to be a bit more informal than my usual ones, and I'd really like to know if you do find this helpful. So, race itself was, it was great. Probably my best race to date, at least just in terms of overall how I felt and how I feel my performance went. I finished up... I just hit my step goal for the day. Nice one, Garmin. I finished as the 6th male overall and was 2nd in my age group. And I think there was about 150 guys and about 200 competitors overall, something like that. So I was super pleased with it overall. Although sadly there was no prizes for 2nd and 3rd in the age group, only 1st and then 1st, 2nd and 3rd overall. But never mind. It was a sprint triathlon, but the swim was even shorter than usual. So it was a 250 meter pool swim. I didn't really mind because I haven't done loads of swimming recently. So it was a kind of good start to the season really as a first race because no wetsuit, no mask start, could just feel pretty comfortable with kind of the whole racing environment. I swam it in 3:38, I think, which definitely isn't a bad pace for me. So then it was on to the bike course, which was heaps of fun. It was a reasonably hilly course, but just a kind of out and back. So it was good to just get your head down and keep working. It was pretty wet and windy at points, which meant visibility wasn't the best. It was the first time I've actually had this issue, but my visor of my helmet just kept fogging up. So while I was on the bars, I was having to put my finger in and try and wipe clear the visor, but it didn't really make too much of a difference. I thought the bike went pretty well for me, and I think it was 6th fastest of the day, so kind of fits with finishing up 6th overall. And then onto the run, which admittedly wasn't the best, and it's something I have been struggling a bit in triathlon, and I think it's probably where my weakest point is now, but it was still all right. I did the 5K in, I think it was 20:30, so not bad, but not amazing, and there's definitely work to be done there. But overall, as I say, awesome race. I just really enjoyed doing it again. So looking forward to more, and I've got my next in a couple of weeks' time. So on to the nutrition side of things, which is really what I wanted to talk about in this video. I guess let's start with before, which is talking about carb loading. Now you might have heard me talk about carb loading before, and it is awesome for triathletes or anyone doing endurance events lasting over about 90 minutes. So by that you can guess that actually it's not super useful for a sprint triathlon. But that doesn't mean it's not useful or that I wouldn't recommend it. It just means you don't have to be quite as kind of strict, I guess, as you might be if you're doing something like, time dependent, but a half marathon, Olympic distance triathlon or anything longer. So I did carb load and my race was on Sunday morning. So from about Friday afternoon, I started increasing the amounts of carbohydrates in my diet and started reducing the amount of fiber of whole grain carbohydrates. So I swapped to white carbohydrates, which I wouldn't normally do, and reducing the amount of fat and protein just so I could proportionally eat more carbohydrates. The reason I was doing this is because I wanted to make sure that my carb stores were full before the race. And although it's not kind of that classic endurance distance where you're really going to be getting the benefits, I didn't want to have any worries about nutrition, and it's certainly not going to be a hindrance. So that's why I did it. If you're interested, by the way, I have done a carb load plan, which you can download from my website. I'll put it in the description or in the comments for you so you can have a look at that. I did something similar to it on the Saturday before my race on the Sunday. I just, as I say, wasn't super strict about it. So breakfast before my race, I had my now classic go-to, which is low-fat rice pudding with a banana, some raisins and a little bit of jam. I find this works really well for me because it is carbohydrate focused, but it's quite simple. It's easy to digest and absorb carbs, along with being low in fiber, low in fat, and a kind of medium amount of protein. For me, that seems to work really well, and it's something that I can enjoy, and I know I can eat early on in the morning. Really, breakfast before a triathlon is just finding something which is carbohydrate focused and low in fat and fiber, low to medium protein, but that you can stomach, especially because sometimes the race starts for triathlons are pretty early. So you just want to know that you can either prepare it the night before, or it doesn't take long in the morning, and that you are actually happy to eat it. Breakfast is always useful before a triathlon just because it helps to top up some of your carbohydrate stores before your race, so you know you're going in with a full tank, because you lose some of them overnight. So it's just a bit of a fail-safe to make sure that you really are kind of ready for your race, but it doesn't need to be, and it shouldn't be, a massive breakfast, because actually that's just going to contribute to gastrointestinal symptoms during the race. So you can just use that to kind of find whatever works for you. And if it does work, then I would advise just sticking to it before any sort of race, just because it means there's another thing there which you just don't have to think about, and you know it's sorted already. So nutrition for me during the race was pretty much non-existent. Actually, when I say pretty much non-existent, it was non-existent. The swim was obviously very short, the bike was 30-35 minutes, and the run was 20 minutes or so. And so my time was about an hour, and I knew it would be somewhere around this sort of point. And for me, the bike actually was one of the most important, because I've been doing quite a lot of work on the bike, and I really wanted to just get my head down and work. Now, during a sprint triathlon, anything you actually take in, so whether that's a drink or a gel or any other sort of nutrition, isn't going to be super helpful during your race, because you actually don't have time to digest it and absorb it, so it's not going to contribute towards a better performance. Really, the only option you have is something called a carbohydrate mouth rinse, and that's where you use something like a carbohydrate-based drink and you swill it around your mouth for 5 or 10 seconds. The aim of carbohydrate mouth rinsing is not to use the carbohydrate as such, but you have receptors in your mouth which notice that you're taking in carbohydrates, and that essentially stimulates your brain. And it's been shown to improve performance, and we know it's not from the actual carbohydrate that you're taking in, it's just this receptor pathway. So really that's the only thing which I could have used. And as I say, I wanted to just really focus on the bike and not have to worry about drinking during, so I just put my head down and went for it. So then it was on to the run, and again, it's way too short to really take anything in during it. It's not useful, so really all I would be wanting to do is the mouth rinse, or just taking some water on board just to either swill my mouth out or to try to cool down. But it wasn't a particularly hot day, well, in fact it was just raining, and I knew I wasn't going to be dehydrated, so again, it just didn't really feel like something I needed to do. Obviously, depending on how long you think it's going to take you to do a sprint triathlon, you might want to consider something, but for most people, it's probably not necessary. But if it makes you feel good, or you're practicing for a longer event, then by all means you can go for it, and it might be really useful then. The other thing to say is that, especially if you have carb loaded and you've had breakfast and you're taking your sprint triathlon at a somewhat steady pace, even if you are trying really hard, then you absolutely shouldn't be bonking. Realistically, there's no way that you should bonk during a sprint triathlon, unless you were doing something like repeated sprints, so trying to sprint during the swimming and then sprinting up hills. You really shouldn't be bonking, so you don't need to take nutrition on board for that either. During a sprint triathlon, you're far more likely to slow down because of another reason rather than nutrition or dehydration. So that might be things like acidosis, so from lactate and hydrogen buildup, or from muscular fatigue. Those are going to be the limiting factors rather than your nutrition. So what I had after my sprint triathlon was what I have pretty much every time, and it's something I can just make up in advance, and it's super easy. I use a carb electrolyte mix and mix it with a protein shake and just have that as a drink straight afterwards. I know then that I'm getting some protein to help repair the muscle tissue, I'm getting electrolytes to just help with any dehydration that might have happened, and I'm getting the fluid alongside that to help replace it, and then I've got the carbohydrates in there as well to help replace the carbs that I lost, which means that your muscle is just going to repair better. And also, if you're planning on training either the next day or in the coming days, you're going to be much better prepared for that because you're replenishing your stores already. And then in the hours afterwards, I just continue to eat well, and I somewhat am dictated just by hunger there. If I feel like I want to eat, I absolutely do. I make sure I drink plenty of fluids, and I just try to enjoy the feeling of finishing my race. At this point, I normally like to swap back to whole grain carbohydrates, actually have more fruits and vegetables because I feel like I've missed them and I've had so much refined and processed foods that it's actually really nice to just start eating normal food again. And that's the same sort of thing that I follow for nutrition the day after a race as well. I tend to go back to kind of normal meals in that I have breakfast, lunch and dinner and just snack in between when I feel hungry. And the big thing to say is, again, focus on whole grain carbohydrates, fresh fruits and veggies, at least 20 grams of protein in every main meal, and if it works, a good source of fat in each meal as well. I mean, really, I'm just talking about the basics of eating a balanced diet, and I go back to that the next day. I just make sure that I really do listen to my body, and if I'm hungry, I have extra. And really, that's how I approach it. I try to just keep it fairly basic and simple, but also I have put a lot of time and effort into the actual prep side of things. As you might expect, I quite like food and doing this sort of thing. But all I would encourage you there is to try to do it in advance and think what you might want to eat or drink during, before, and afterwards, and start to almost get into a bit of a ritual to it, or try to make it some sort of a habit. It just means that there is much less stress come race day, and you know that you're going to be as well prepared for it as possible and recover as well as possible as well. So I think that probably concludes it for this video. I don't know how long this is going to be, or whether I have just waffled and it's not particularly useful, but I hope it is. If you have any questions about it, or you've just started racing for the season, I would love to know. I'm really excited about racing again just because I have missed it, and I'm looking forward to seeing kind of where I'm at, especially over the next 6 to 10 weeks, because I've got quite a hard block of training coming up. So if you did find this video useful, then please do give it a thumbs up. And if you're new here and you haven't already, then do press the subscribe button and the notification icon to stay up to date with all of the videos that I release. I do different videos on nutrition topics, which I hope you might find useful, and I've put one of them here for you. Otherwise, have fun with your training and your racing, nutrition nerds, and I'll catch you soon. See ya.